So as we talked about in class, section 6.1 focuses on working with expressions, things like combining like terms, and also solving linear equations. All right, so a few things to remind you about. The difference between an expression and an equation is whether or not there's an equal sign in there. Okay, if there's an equal sign, you can solve it. If there's not, if it's just an expression, all you can do is simplify it. Okay, so really important to make sure that you're clear on combining like terms, because that's how you simplify in an expression or an equation. All right, and we talked about that in class. Right, important to make sure that you understand how to correctly use the distributive property to remove parentheses, because you can't simplify or solve until you get rid of parentheses. All right, and as you do that, you are going to run into some cases where you have to deal a little bit with fractions. Now, like we talked about in class, if it's an equation, you can get rid of the fractions. If it's an expression, you can't. All right, you're going to have to work with those fractions to be able to combine them. All right, so if I were looking at this particular expression, okay, there's no equal to in it, and I wanted to simplify. All right. The first thing that jumps out at me here is the fact that there are fractions, and I could go ahead and start thinking about what that common denominator would be now, but it's probably going to be easier if I go ahead and distribute so that I'll know what each individual term is going to look like. Okay, so 2/3 times x, right, is just going to be 2/3 x. And then be careful when you start multiplying your fractions, right? I like to kind of go over to the side to work those out. So 2/3 times 6, 12/3, which is just 4. So this becomes 2/3 x plus 4. And then over here, make sure when you distribute, you note the sign, all right? This is a positive 1/6. So I'm going to have 1/6 x, and then 1/6 times 6, 6/6. So this is going to give me 1. All right, now combining like terms, right? You have to have the same variable and you have to have the same exponent. So I can go ahead and combine my constant terms very easily, right? 4 plus 1 is just going to be 5. But I also need to combine my x terms. And I've got a 2/3 and a 1/6. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and combine my constant terms, put that on the end. All right, and now I need to combine 2/3 and 1/6. And again, when I'm working with fractions, I like to come over to the side and kind of do it on its own, so I don't get mixed up in my expression. So what I need to do here with those x terms is take 2/3 and add 1/6. All right, now when you're multiplying, you don't have to worry about common denominators. Right? Multiply across the top, multiply across the bottom. But for adding or subtracting, you cannot do anything until the denominators are the same. So for 3 and 6, the common denominator would be 6. Okay, so I'm going to leave that one like it is. And I'm going to change this one to a denominator of 6. Now the way I do that is I multiply it by 2. And whatever I do to the bottom, I've also got to do to the top. All right, so 2/3 becomes 4/6. Right, the other one already had a denominator of 6. And now I'm able to add those together, add across the top, keep the common denominator. And I see that my new coefficient down here is going to be 5/6. And that's the coefficient of x. So fully simplified here, we're going to have 5/6 x plus 5. And at that point, we can't simplify any further. because one of these is an x term and one of these is a constant term. Okay, so again, combining like terms, I think you're all pretty clear on, what you can combine and what you cannot combine. But just be careful when you got some fractions in there. There's a second problem in the notes for you as well, because you will have to be a little bit more careful when you start adding and subtracting with fractions to combine those like terms to make sure that you get the correct coefficient.